Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Casting Seeds. I'm Savannah, your holistic health practitioner and host, and you're listening to the only holistic health podcast that uses God's singular truth to give you individualized discernment. You can probably tell my voice is still a little raspy, and I'm super thankful for the prayers that I've received in this past week for getting better with my cough that I've had. Going to the dry Utah desert was definitely not helpful in that whatsoever, but the fermented garlic honey really did help a lot and helped me calm down in my cough. I actually wanted to talk about for this week's episode just because, again, I'm still not feeling great, so it's going to be a shorter episode today, and it's going to be hard not to cough during it. But we actually had our second big bleed today, this past Saturday. And I wanted to share what we do holistically and why Jeremiah and I didn't worry. It doesn't mean that we didn't have hurt and weren't a little sad when it happened, especially I think for Jeremiah because he can feel so helpless as the husband in the situation who literally all he can do is pray and just support me through it. But I wanted to talk about bleeding during pregnancy and just kind of the unrealistic fears that can be placed on women. And if anyone today has had any pregnancy loss, especially us after having 4, I thought it would be a lot more difficult every time I bled. But actually God has given us really amazing peace, and especially me, where I thought it would be way more terrifying. And I just wanted to discuss how we've been able to get through it and why, especially this past Saturday, even though I bled significantly on Saturday morning and was nowhere near my OB, and I could go to a hospital, of course, if I needed, but why we chose not to and why we didn't have a ton of fear based around it. I know for Jeremiah in particular, it can be hard for him to talk about because there is just still a lot of sensitivity for us, and the fact that, Jeremiah has now seen a living, wiggly, happy baby in my womb. And even hearing the heartbeat was hard for him because it really drove home that we had 4 losses. Not that he didn't understand that before, but it's just different when you can visually see and understand what you're missing out on. And I did tell people often that I was very thankful that our losses happened very early because I could, for one of the miscarriages, I definitely did see what looked like a possible baby, but there was nothing ever, for sure that I could see within that 8-week time period. So how then could we go from having significant losses, 4 of them in a row in 1 year, to having genuinely like 2 really big bleeds and really big health scares during our pregnancy before 18 weeks. And honestly, I just want to say the first time that it did happen, first Jeremiah and I knew that we had to apply one practical wisdom into this pregnancy. I do think, the moment we found out we were pregnant or thought that we could be, instead of me trying to keep it a secret and be all, make it a big, exciting thing, I immediately went to Jeremiah saying like, hey, I have a feeling that I could be pregnant. And we just prayed a lot over it, even though it wasn't something that we necessarily planned. But we knew that there was a high chance because, I was ovulating when we made love. So when it came to about a week and a half to 2 weeks later, and I had that feeling I was pregnant, instead of waiting until 4 weeks because I had miscarriages, I went and did an immediate blood test, which anyone can do with or without insurance. I can give it to any one of you guys for a very, very inexpensive price. I think originally the price was a year ago, only $7. And then the $10 processing fee by LabCorp or Quest Labs. And I don't charge anything for labs. And so now I think when I paid for it, it was $10 and then another $10 processing fee, which $20 for finding out the exact number of HCG levels was so worth it. And it was amazing because when I took the blood test, it came in the next day and it said out of between 5 and 100, if there's anything above 5, you're pregnant. And I was at 69. So knowing that we were pregnant right away, I knew that it was do or die time to really hone in and make sure that we at least got an OB, because it's much harder to find a midwife who will work with you within that time period. And in California, midwives are really expensive and not covered by insurance. And we don't have the finances personally to be able to have a midwife, even though I would prefer that. So we went straight to any OB that would take us. It also was during December, so it was much more difficult to find an OB that would take us. So literally anyone who would, I went to right away. And the first OB that would see us was literally the day after Christmas, so December 26th. And I was about 6 weeks pregnant at that point. And that was the week that we had very high stress with our family. And I had a significant, on my birthday, which is the 29th of December, that morning I woke up, we went to church, and I saw that I was spotting. And I just felt so sick all day. Even my family asked me if I was okay, but I went and got prayer from my pastor. And I just said, I just want one more day of being pregnant and treated normally. And I just want everything to be okay. And he prayed over me. He prayed over the baby. And I didn't say anything to Jeremiah or anyone that day. I just wanted things to be normal and I wanted it to be joyful. But everyone knew I was not feeling well. And I did. I rested that day. I also had fun walking around with my dad and Jeremiah at REI. And I honestly, during that time frame, and the reason why I'm sharing this part of the story, because it was our first bleed and our second one was this past Saturday, was because in that moment and time frame, I knew that no matter what, the same, like if a miscarriage was starting, that ultimately the same as my other 4 babies, that this life is 100% God's. And the same way that my life is and Jeremiah's is and any other life on this planet. And having that aspect of my identity be solely in Christ, even though I do want a part of my identity to be the fact that I'm a wife and the fact that I'm a mother, it's good to remember that all of those things are just blessings and they are not eternal. They are only a part of this life, right? I'm not going to be a wife in heaven. I'm not going to be a mother in heaven. These are blessings that God allows us to have. And in that time, I will use it in the ministry that he's asking me or calling me to do, but it's not forever. Same thing with being a holistic health practitioner. Just because I have a background and a licensure, certificates and knowledge doesn't mean that I'm going to be using that for God's kingdom come. And whatever my ministry is that I'm being called to right now is what's most important. So that day I really got to take a step back and remember who is most important and what is most important in life. And having that time by myself, and I don't know, it felt like it was necessary. When I did finally mention to Jeremiah that something significant was happening, was I was lightly spotting all day and it was very light pink. And I felt so awful. And I almost felt bruisey as well in my womb, especially on the left side where I knew I had implantation. And yeah, it was just interesting because around 8:00 at night, I finally had, when I went to the restroom, a really big, bright red, like release bleed, almost like a gush of blood come out of me. And it was really interesting because looking back, I almost felt an instant amount of relief, like kind of like a pimple popped, like I felt so much better. But I also had a huge wave of fear come over me. And I couldn't help but think like, okay, there hasn't been any cramping, other signs of like a true miscarriage. Before, when I miscarried, it was cramping first and then bleeding or spotting after. So this felt very different than anything I had ever experienced. And I knew it didn't feel like a miscarriage, but I knew something didn't feel 100% right. So I'm really thankful that we literally had just met our OB that past, was it Tuesday, Wednesday? I forget when Christmas was, but we just met her that past week. And then I got to be able to go in for an emergency that next day, which was Monday morning. And I got put on oral progesterone. And also I asked everyone and their mom for prayer. I posted it on Facebook and on Instagram. And I said, I know it's taboo to share pregnancies this early. I know that people don't like it. I know it can make people uncomfortable, especially if we do miscarry again, but I don't care. I believe in the power of prayer. And ultimately, we're asking, of course, for prayer for protection over our baby, but no matter what happens, for Jeremiah and I to be at peace with God's will and his purpose and his desire for what he wants to do with this life and with our lives. So I don't know. I think honestly, I really did start to have peace that day, but there was something so special about having, it's hard. I'm like at a loss for words. Having even strangers on the internet that I've never met before just pray the most beautiful, I'm like getting choked up, some of the most beautiful and thoughtful prayers that I've ever read over our unborn child and over our marriage. And I was just so humbled knowing that like absolute strangers had dedicated to praying to us weekly, and some people even daily. And I wanted to state how important it is to really lean on your church community, not just the local church, but the whole church, like the world church, because people really do want to love on you individually. And I do think that vulnerability of us consistently talking about, our pregnancy loss and our health that we healed from, and then how we got pregnant again, and, just going through this, but understanding that this life is only God's. I do think that people really enjoyed the fact that we were vulnerable and honest, and that it's okay to hurt through these things and be not scared in the fact that we don't trust God, but just scared in the fact that we'd have to deal with another loss, and that's sad and that's hard and that's okay. So, I don't know. I felt like I had peace before, but having that prayer and knowing at any point in time, I'm not bothering people, being honest and vulnerable online and asking people for prayer, like people want it. And they actually, random people now check in on me and Jeremiah and say, how are you? How's the baby? How can we be praying for you? How can we be praying for Jeremiah's work? And it's been really, really amazing. So after that first experience, leading into now, I got sick again, which was not ideal, because anytime you get sick, there's definitely higher risk for miscarriage, of course. But I didn't think about how hard my coughing was. And also too, I've done a lot of breath work and training. So I really activate my lower diaphragm and my pelvic floor whenever I breathe, let alone when I cough. And I could feel sometimes that when I coughed really hard, it actually would hurt my lower abdominals. And I could feel the baby and my, especially there's a ligament that goes across the lower band of your belly. I could feel it pull uncomfortably. And, now almost at 18 weeks, at this Saturday, it just felt different. And last Saturday, I just turned 17 weeks, and I just felt that same feeling that I mentioned the first time, where I all of a sudden just got really tired. I felt really weak, and I thought it was just because I was sick. But, honestly, I told Jeremiah too, like I have a bruisey feeling again, like I did that last time. And, that night I coughed so hard and so much. Mucus was pouring out of me, which is good because I was getting rid of the illness. But I felt awful, and I was tossing and turning all night. It was dry. Being out there was horrible, but I loved being with my family. And I woke up that next morning, and it was probably like anywhere between 6 or 7 a.m. And I went to go use the restroom. And after I did, again, I wiped, and there was bright blood red, like dark red, and then a huge gush into the toilet. And I got a little shaky because that gush feeling didn't feel good or normal. But afterwards, again, it was like that bruisey feeling felt so much lighter, like almost like something bad was there, and then my body released. So once that happened, I kind of got up, and I was like, oh man, I don't want to wake up Jeremiah, because he looked so peaceful and looked like he was finally resting. And but I knew he would be sad if I didn't wake him up and ask him for help and rely on him. And we were in bunk beds. So I tapped him at the top bunk and I was like, hey, honey. And I felt bad waking him up this way, but I just explained to him what happened. And he immediately was so helpful and loving. And he actually came down and cuddled with me on the little twin bed on the bunk bed, which did help me calm down, actually made me feel a lot better. He helped me hydrate a lot too, which is also really important when you've had a big loss of blood. And we actually just got soup the day before, which was great. So he brought me up some chicken tortilla soup, which was really nourishing and felt so good when I ate it. And it also was just such a gentle and light protein for me to be able to consume that will also help the baby as well. So there were really practical things that we did that helped support me and the baby. But also on top of that, I started coughing differently and just trying to change the way that I coughed, but still be able to get stuff out of me. We also were very light on our feet that day. I did walk around a little bit at a state park, but just like for 5 minutes. We took a drive through it just to kind of get me out of the house and to calm him down and just for us to be able to be in God's creation. But ultimately, it just was a huge blessing because, again, I reached out to my prayer community on Instagram and Facebook and let everyone know that I was bleeding that morning and asked for prayer. And again, I was lightly spotting afterwards this time. And then the spotting fully went away by 12 o'clock. So we didn't leave the house until after my spotting was completely done. But again, I think that what people don't realize is, especially after this, I looked into how often do women bleed? Like, is this common? And I couldn't believe how the stats were definitely on my side for women who bleed during pregnancy that actually don't have anything to do with miscarriage. So I found out that 25% of women in all pregnancies, and I mean full pregnancies, like you go to full term and have a baby, 25% of women, which is 1/4 of every woman on the planet, bleed. Whether it's consistent spotting or big gushes of blood, they bleed. Some women even have continued menstrual cycles and they're completely fine. But the biggest things to look out for is, of course, number one is cramping. Cramping is not a great sign because it's technically like a type of labor. And then other things are like a ton of fluid or a mucus, plug, things like that. Those aren't great to see. And of course, then you should go see your doctor or midwife if anything like that is happening, or go to the emergency room. But to find out that bleeding is actually really consistent and common for women, and my OB has never discussed that with me, and no midwife ever has either, or doula. I think that was really frustrating to discover how common it is. And I'm really thankful that I have a holistic health background and I know how to renourish and replenish any fluids that are gone by, coconut water, high in electrolytes, making sure I'm getting good salts in, again, things like soup, things that are nourishing and easy for the baby and myself to digest. It's almost like you treat your body like you're sick, and resting your body, of course. But finding out seriously how common it is almost kind of felt like a knife in the heart because there's so much fear-based, I don't want to say education because it felt like a false education, but there's so much fear based around pregnancy in general and around women's wombs and around birth. And yeah, I guess in the nicest way possible, I'm really over all of the fear-based knowledge that's out there that has to do with pregnancy. And I think this is why Jeremiah and I have been really attracted to the idea of doing not an unmedicated birth. We were going to do that from the get-go, but an unassisted birth at home, because it feels like 99% of the time, our own parental instincts have been more accurate than what has even been taught to us or told to us. Even when we visit the OB, there's just been a lot of fear-based conversations and, whether it's finding out the DNA of our child beforehand so that when they've offered to terminate, even down to like the first time we went in, talking about the baby's heart rate being lower than average, even though when we looked it up, it was average. So it's just, I feel like every time we go in, there's always been negative commentary. And I know that everyone has different OBs and different experiences, but it's a common thing that we often have to worry about, especially out here in California. And I did get some really wonderful advice from a friend saying like, hey, if you do end up giving birth in a hospital, I want you to know you can say things like specifically with vaccines and stuff, that it's okay for you to say, you know what, we're considering doing it a little bit later, like a few weeks from now, just to get them off your back. But it's hard to think that, you know, when you're wanting to spend time with your newborn, you're going to have to be worried about having conversations like that. So, ultimately, at the end of the day, I wanted to share this episode, one, because it was deep in my heart and something really uncomfortable that I didn't think that Jeremiah and I would be going through again at 18, like going on to our 18th week. I didn't think that big gushes of blood could happen like that randomly. But I will say, the fact that I felt so much better afterwards, I felt a little guilty at first because I was like, well, I feel better, but is the baby okay? And we did go to the OB today and I got a baby's heart rate checked and it's 144. So he or she is doing great. I was surprised that they didn't want to check the fluid sac around the baby, but the midwife that was there literally kept talking about how my skin was glowing and I looked really healthy. And she's like, I know you're really hydrated and you take good care of yourself. I can tell just by your skin and your hair. So that was a great compliment. But I did want to share this because I wanted people to be able to share this episode maybe with parents who have had loss, parents who are worried to get pregnant again, or parents who even have kids but constantly live in a fear-based relationship with God, because honestly, God says that perfect love casts out all fear, right? And then also too, another verse is actually coming to my mind. Let me pull it up. Philippians 4:6-7. So it says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Verse 7 says, then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. And I can say wholeheartedly, if I honestly think this verses are the reason why, I felt peace before and I prayed to him intimately, but God also says when two or more gather, I am dwelling with you. And I asked hundreds of people to gather in the presence of God and pray on behalf of Jeremiah and I and our child. And I'm not joking when I say that peace that surpasses all understanding has been so prevalent throughout this pregnancy. And I have personally had no fear about how this baby is and what's going on. And my family was genuinely shocked when I came downstairs on Saturday morning and I was like, yeah, I'm not feeling good because I've been bleeding, but it's okay. And of like 8 of them were like, do we need to go to the emergency? And I was like, nope, it's okay. I know the signs or symptoms when I need to go, and I'm not cramping, I'm hydrating, I'm resting. And even Jeremiah was so calm, even though we were both kind of sad because the potential was there to lose another life. And until we see them in the kingdom come, we both were okay. And asking for more prayer again, I just had even more peace. So I really want to make it clear to parents that it's also so prevalent when you live a fear-based life. It's so evident in your children. And I've seen it over and over again in holistic health. Also, when I used to nanny, those children who are raised that way with really worrisome parents who don't let them explore and have fun and maybe even get hurt a little bit and test healthy boundaries. When you are overprotective and over fearful for your child, it takes away a genuine curiosity for God's creation, but it also creates so much hesitance for that child for the rest of their life, where they're fearful to go after that job. They're fearful to be the woman that they're called to be when God's calling them to convict them to do something and be, or the man that they're supposed to be as a leader for their home. When you don't allow your children to grow in this way and allow them to be challenged and loved by the Lord and taught by him intimately, you are hindering them as a parent. And I already see it. I see it sometimes with my friends, and I'm so thankful I've been able to learn and glean from them. I've seen it especially in a lot of holistic parents that come into my office, because a lot of them, even though they're interested in holistic health, a lot of it is fear-based. And it's just as equally as fearful as when people come in saying that they want every single medicine possible for allopathic medicine. So at the end of the day, I don't care if you guys are using all allopathic medicine or all holistic medicine. What I care about is your spiritual walk with Christ, and for you to allow your children and yourself to have genuine intimacy and love. If perfect love casts out all fear, that means if you're living in fear, that perfect love is not in your life. God's not ruling your life. Your fears are, and your identity isn't in him. So I just want that. I want that to resonate in my listeners, and I want them to understand that this is why I think when we talk about who are you doing this for in this podcast, this is what I mean. Holistic health has to do with you doing every single thing for Christ, first and foremost, and everything else will fall back into place after that. It's not easy. I'm not saying Jeremiah and I have had it easy by any means, and we don't choose God all the time and we fail, but in those failures, we don't dwell in it. We repent and admit when we've failed and when we've sinned and when we messed up, and ask God for another chance for us to be able to choose him. So I want to say I love you guys, and I'm super thankful and honored for this podcast. And I just felt so convicted to talk about this today. One, because it's genuinely happening to me right now, and I'm tired. I don't feel good. I'm trying to be as healthy as I can for the baby and work, and also do well for my clients and do well for you guys in the podcast. And I'm just praying that God blesses us when Jeremiah with, more financial stability and the career opportunities that he has coming up. And I'm really excited to grow with you guys and continue this in any way, shape, or form possible. So I pray that this, even though this is a hard episode, that you guys can hear this with love and conviction and understanding. And just know that if you have fear in any aspect of your life, I'm here to love on you, and same with Jeremiah. And so is your local church. You guys deserve to understand what God's love truly means. And if that means opening up your word more, praying more, but also asking for prayer in community, all those things, 3 things need to happen. So just know I love you guys. And remember, we're not here to cast pearls. We're here to cast seeds and to plant them and receive them and glean from one another. So I love you guys, and I'm so thankful. And as always, thank you for your prayers. I also have quite a few listeners who have been reaching out, and I don't have their names with me right now. And I promise, mention their names next week, because they also have some prayer requests for you guys as listeners. But please keep casting seeds, and don't hesitate to share episodes like this for people who really, really need to hear it. And yeah, I love you guys. I'll see you next week.
We hope you enjoyed learning how to cultivate God's creation from a biblical perspective. Holistic health is to prioritize whole person wellness through Christ. Like and comment on what topics we're casting seeds or casting pearls.
If you found this information provided useful, subscribe to our podcast for future updates, leave a review to help us improve, and share this episode. We would like to remind you before we leave that perfect health cannot be attained in this world.
Only spiritual salvation through sanctification and repentance to God and turning away from sin will give you a perfect body in the kingdom come. Nourish yourself in the Word, in prayer, and in biblical fellowship daily.
Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to our listeners for making this podcast possible.
Always praying.
Keep casting seeds.